Good afternoon. I'm Sonta Henderson. On behalf of Austin PBS and Leadership Austin, thank you for joining us for this ATX Together Engage series. Our topic today, the new sandwich generation. Who's taking care of you when you're taking care of so many? We'll explore how we are coping with caregiving for parents and children at the same time. We are excited to have three knowledgeable panelists joining us for today's discussion to help you become better informed on this topic. We have Andrew Levak, who's the Senior Program Officer at St. David's Foundation, Sonolia Holt Rabb, a mother and a daughter, and City of Austin Economic Development Director, Brooke Freeland, Director of Early Matters and Best Places for Working in Texas. So let's begin with each of you telling us a little bit about yourselves, your careers, and your background. Andrew?
Thanks, Sonta, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm a senior program officer at St. David's Foundation, and in that work, I manage a portfolio, a focus area that looks at older adults and looks at how to support older adults as they age in place. So a lot of my work within that work is around the issue of family caregiving. And so that work includes providing grants to nonprofit organizations in Central Texas that provide training and resources and referrals and respite programs to provide support for family caregivers. And then it also looks at addressing some of the underlying systems and policies and challenges within our system around how to support families as they try to provide care for their older adults. But it's interesting, I come at this not only as someone who carries a focus area around older adults, but someone who works with a foundation that looks at caregiving throughout the lifespan. We have a focus on early childhood and childhood resilience, and so there's a caregiving component to that. And we have a focus on women's health, and as the introduction noted, there's certainly a disproportionate burden of care that women experience around caregiving. So I look forward to talking about this.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Synovia?
Thank you, Santa. I'm Sylvonia Holt Rabb, and I'm the director for the City of Austin's Economic Development Department. I manage a staff of 74, and we bridge the traditional economic development with our creative sector. I am a mother of a 17-year-old and a caregiver to my mom, along with my other siblings, two of them, who is 88 and suffering from Alzheimer's. So I live the sandwich generation every day, and here to share my story. Hopefully it will help someone in their journey.
Thank you, Synovia. Brooke?
Hi, Santa. Thank you for elevating this important topic. I am currently a consultant with United Way for Greater Austin. And in that role, I focus on bringing together business leaders in support of early childhood education policies. And part of that work is promoting family-friendly workplace practices, understanding that business plays a role in supporting the caregiving needs of their workforce. I too am a member of the sandwich generation. I'm a mother of two girls, ages 11 and 13, and a daughter of active but aging parents. So like many of you on this call, kind of living it as well in the day-to-day.
All right, Brooke, we look forward to your insights. So we know that a Pew study shows the number of adults ages 40 through 59 sandwiched between taking care of parents and children has grown. It begs the question of self-care for these individuals in terms of finances, emotional care, and more. So we're glad all of you can join us today as subject matter experts. And now some people are part of this sandwich generation and may not even know it. So let's begin with identifying what it is. The first question I'll have for each of you is, what are the main characteristics of the sandwich generation? Alex? Or Andrew, I'm sorry.
Oh, sure. Well, it's a very encompassing definition. In fact, I have some sub-definitions of who sort of falls within the sandwich generation. As you mentioned, there are over, to begin with, just 42 million adults, ARP reports, caring for an older adult, and many of them are also caring for a young child. According to Pew, in that same study you mentioned, 23% of U.S. older adults are technically providing care for an older adult and a child. So it's a really significant number of people living in America with these challenges. But I think that only starts to scratch the surface of who is involved in these challenges around care for young and care for old. There's a sub-term called the grand sandwich generation. That is, people who are grandparents of kids who are providing care for them and also caring for a loved one. So we find, a lot of times grandparents, because of circumstances with the parents of their children, they take over custodial guardianship roles or just being a primary caregiver. So an additional challenge there as you age, the challenges that you experience as you're aging, and then also caring for younger grandchildren. But I would say, finally, the dynamics I would say also is to think about people's experiences are very different within this definition. Brooke mentioned something that I experienced too, which is that, I'm raising a 10 and a 13-year-old with my wife, and my parents and my wife's parents are aging. But, we're not engaged in day-to-day caregiving activities for them, but we certainly are involved in that aging process with them. But I would say that's a lighter load than you think about someone who's providing very intensive day-to-day care for someone like Sylvonia, who's got, a mom living with dementia, which can be incredibly demanding. And then if you think about, for me, I've got kids in middle school, and it's, they don't really need my care that much. But you think about someone who's raising kids with special needs or very early childhood is very different. So just to kind of recognize that while we have a universe of a sandwich generation, there's incredible varied experience within that.
Great insight, Andrew. We'll touch on some of those topics that you mentioned further on in the conversation. Sylvonia?
So for me, I am that baby boomer that Andrew mentioned, and I definitely have an active 17-year-old. He's very active in sports, now approaching senior year, so trying to help guide him through his next journey in life. But also with my mom, I am not physically in Florida, but along with my two siblings, we manage a care team. We have a total of 8 individuals on our team. And so that's coordinating schedules. As I joke each week, I run payroll every Sunday from here to try to lift that burden off my siblings, because we have 3 distinct areas. I have a sister who's a nurse, so she's charged with going to the doctor, understanding the medication, how to adjust it. I have a finance background, so I manage the budget. I run the payroll. I talk to the long-term care insurance. I talk to the home health agency that we use on the weekend. Yeah, I'm engaged in managing the portfolio so that she can age at home versus being placed in a facility, even though we may get to that point at some point in life. Right now, the 3 of us have agreed that we will try to keep her in her home as long as we can. And then my brother, he helps with maintenance and some other financial aspects that we have set up that helps provide care. So it is not easy. Sometimes I feel guilty because I'm here and they are both there. Sometimes I'll get a call because she goes into what we call sundowners in the afternoon, and just trying to calm her. Had a call Saturday. She was ready to go home. She wanted to talk to her dad, and where's Grandpa Jesse and Grandma Jessie? And it was like, Mother, you're home. So I'm on the phone 30 minutes trying to calm her. And usually it works. But that day she was just in a space that's part of the process. And we give ourselves that space, my siblings and I, because we say to each other, we never expected to be here. This is a whole journey, and every patient writes their own story. I have 4 close friends who are in the midst of what I'm in. And I tell them all the time, you can always call me. I'll share my experiences. They share their experience. So it is a real thing. Like I said, I have 4 close friends who are just in the midst. One actually moved her mom to Round Rock this weekend. She spent 2 weekends trying to get her mom packed up. So It is a balancing act, but my siblings and I are definitely on the same page, and that's a blessing. That we all understand the care process, and if we don't, we call someone and we talk through challenges, especially when you're hiring. That is just hard. Finding good people that can care for her and love on her, because I'm not there. So they're my eyes and ears. So sorry to go. Yes.
Thank you, Synovia. So it seems like a lot of teamwork involved with this. Brooke, could you expand?
Yeah, absolutely. And as Synovia points out, caregiving is a full-time job on top of our other full-time job. And it really takes a village. A family, a team, a network. And I didn't really know. I just thought the sandwich generation, I didn't know there was a title for it. That was just kind of the role we grow into as we age and as our parents age. A lot of my focus professionally has been around supports for families with young children and ensuring that they have the supports they need so that they can arrive at work fully focused and present. And it's same with the elder generation too. It's what can an employer do to really ensure that their workforce feels supported so that when they need to focus on their family, they have that time and the space to do so.
Okay, thank you, Brooke. We already have a question from our virtual audience, and that question is, and I'll pose this for Synovia and you as well, Brooke, is what are the benefits and special moments with young people and older generations living together? And I know both of you have some experiences. So Synovia, could you share one perhaps?
After my parents retired and I had my son, I would actually let him go to Florida as young as, I think he was like 1.5. And so that bonding time was just special. And he would go every summer up until probably 09-ish. And then my mom would come here and spend time with us. So it's a beautiful thing. Even when he was born, because I had him late, she said, I just want to be able to spend 10 good years with him. And now we're up to 17, and she still recognizes him, which is a blessing. And so just to be able to share wisdom from when she grew up, she was an educator. So she's big on reading, and she always stressed, even today, are you reading a book? What book can we read together? And then we have a dialogue about it. So they used to do that. But now with her attention span, she doesn't read as much, but they used to have those dialogue, even long distance. I would order the same book so that they could have conversations about it.
Thank you. Brooke?
Yeah. So my husband and I often talk about the sweet spot when your kids are old enough to spend time kind of independently with their grandparents, and the grandparents are still kind of young enough to be able to take care of that kids. And there's that finite window of time, and it's just an incredible special moments. And so unfortunately we moved away from my parents and my in-laws just as we were kind of entering that phase of life. But we do make sure that we travel back and forth. And now that my kids are at a certain age, they can kind of spend time independently with their grandparents without needing my husband and I around. And that's really special to have that friendship and that bond. And even if it's texting or FaceTiming, there's so much wisdom and learning that is shared between those generations that the more we can do to cultivate those opportunities, the better. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to add to that. Sonta, thanks for sharing that question, and for whoever asked it. I love it because it brings up a really important point about caregiving, which is that, we started framing it as an incredible challenge, and it is, and it's also a gift. And it's important to recognize the two pieces to that. And in terms of the intergenerational exchange, it can be remarkable. We actually fund about 3 years ago, we started funding some initiatives that were through an initiative around intergenerational programming called Connecting Generations, which isn't sort of through family, but just through service and volunteerism, finding opportunities for older adults to connect with younger adults to sort of share those goals of, supporting social connection for older adults and childhood development and mentoring for younger generations. And it's fascinating the reciprocity that can happen for older adults to find meaning and purpose in their lives by engaging with young children. And Brooke, sometimes, those older adults, if they don't have their grandchildren in, their locale, they can still connect with young people. And then the value that young people get from learning about older adults and their experiences and having, mental stimulation and mentorship from those older adults, which supports their brain development. Simple, just, things as simple as reading to a young child and having the serve and return interaction between older adults and younger adults. And also, therefore, alleviating some stress that working parents have by having some of that care work unburdened to them by older adults is really great. So I just love that question was asked.
Yeah. And I'll add to that, Andrew, even with the cost of childcare now, a lot of working parents are relying on their parents to help step in and support the child care needs. And we see that a lot as that kind of older generation is even retiring earlier to help support their children, their grandchildren, and helping support the raising and care of their grandchildren.
Yes.
Keep that thought, because we're definitely going to move on and talk about childcare. That's one of the points that we'll make later in this discussion. So we're talking about adults taking care of adults and their children at the same time. So then you add in the self-care, the personal mental health, the things that we all need, to keep us going each day. So the question is, how do these people prioritize all these things? Now, each of you can give tips on what works or even what doesn't work so people can understand, as they move through this process. So Novia, I'll begin with you.
So if I could say one thing, therapy. Get a good therapist. Get you a good exercise routine, making sure you eat right. And it's okay to vent. If you need to go out and scream and cry, do it, because crying cleanses the soul at times. But I personally have a great therapist. She's actually has lived this. She took care of her mom. Her mom had Alzheimer's, so she can relate to things that I need to discuss. An exercise plan. I try to walk 5 miles every day just to keep the stress level down. I have, like I said, friends who are in the same boat. We bounce things off of each other, get massages, and make sure you have a great balanced meal. And so therapy is my number one. Find you a good therapist that you can relate to.
Thank you, Synovia. I like the massages too. So Brooke, could you add to that?
I'm going to be reaching out to you after this, Novia, to get all your numbers and connections. Self-care is definitely something that gets put on the back burner by so many, and our needs get put second behind the needs of everybody else. That's why the great kind of she session, and it wasn't just mothers, but primarily that 15 million U.S. workers left the workforce since April of 2021. I mean, burnout is real. And I think how to address your needs is different for everybody, but we all kind of know what we need, and carving out time each day to, even if it's 5 minutes for yourself, I think it's essential. And I think employers need to recognize that as well, and factor into the workday opportunities for their workforce to take time for themselves as well.
Andrew?
Yeah, I can add to that, certainly. One of the things that Sylvonia mentioned is that, she does ask for support. She asks for support from her family members, from other people who've been through this experience. And I think that's so important. There are caregiver support groups for that very reason, because it is lonely and it is really hard. And knowing that other people experience what they're going through and being able to relate to that is really powerful. We fund Age of Central Texas runs adult day health centers, and caregivers drop off their parents there or their family members in the morning and the afternoon. And I visited there several times, and I always see these clusters of people hanging out in front. Those are the caregivers. And, they drop off and they really just need time to sort of talk to peers about what they're experiencing and what they're going through, and talking about the challenges they experience, and just being seen by others and being heard by others. So that's a big part of it. And then the other part that I think it can help address is that, again, Sylvia mentioned that she has guilt. Every caregiver has guilt because it's never enough, right? And it's always hard, and there's always really hard choices. So, that opportunity to give yourself grace in the challenges, that no one's a perfect care provider. You're going to be frustrated. You're going to fail. You're not going to be up to the mark. And it's really important to sort of give yourself that grace in that space.
Yeah, and Sonta, if I could add, I definitely have a therapist, and she may tell you, well, Sylvonia doesn't do it well. I try my best, but even she'll say, when was the last time you scheduled one? But she would say, I don't do it well. But those are definitely keys, having that support group and a supportive workforce. Employer is key too.
Okay, thank you, Synovia. We do have a follow-up question for you, Synovia. You talked about caring for your mom and having to work with the doctors and things of that nature. So the question is, what special documentation did you have to get, if any, to move this process forward?
Great question. So we had to put in place powers of attorney and make sure you get a good attorney to cover all the bit, whether it's financial, around insurance, around her banking information. Definitely get you a good attorney. Also, one thing that I learned, even on Medicare, I made a call, and we could go into a whole nother topic about why Social Security and Medicare is not age friendly. But there's a form that you have to submit to the government to even get it details about the Medicare of your parents. And so I would definitely say you definitely need a power of attorney. Find you a good lawyer that can properly craft one for you. Make sure that you have that on file with the doctors. So my sister and my brother and I are listed on the doctors to be able to talk with her about her medical needs, et cetera. But as I mentioned, because my sister is a nurse, she's the primary person that has the conversation. She has the nurse's phone number on speed dial. So develop a good relationship with your doctor, even if it's not the doctor, the nurse. So power of attorney, make sure you're on the HIPAA information so you can have a conversation. Make sure you're on the Medicare. There's a form and you can go out to the system and pull it down. And make sure you're on every account, every document. And that means sending in the power of attorney, because my mom had annuities and long-term care insurance, and how it is just a process. So definitely a power of attorney is key.
Great. So thank you to the virtual audience member for posing that question, because it leads, right into the next for us. We talk about these responsibilities that the sandwich generation has. So that can include, still working a full-time job and trying to do everything at home, providing shelter, paying the bills. So the question becomes, what are some of the best recommendations for how to plan financially to take care of the parents? I'll start with Brooke.
Yeah, that's a great question, Sonta. And I think it's starting with conversations too with the parents early on. I know that I have conversations with my parents and with my in-laws about what their hopes are, what their expectations are as they age, and financially planning around those collectively. And it's a struggle too, and it takes, there's multiple family meetings as we discussed. If there could be a roadmap to outline kind of all the steps and procedures, I think, or technology. I mean, there's a role here for a sector to step in and kind of create a roadmap for all of us as we are kind of learning on the go and navigating, kind of figuring out what we need to know as we go along.
Yeah, I can build on that, Brooke, because I think that conversation is so important. And when Sylvia was talking about power of attorney, it reminded me that, in our aging portfolio, we do a lot of end-of-life planning. And it's this unique opportunity to have family members talk together and and help them really talk and plan, what their plans are for their end of life. What medical interventions do they want to have, who should have power of attorney, and it's a really important conversation. But what we've kind of learned in that is that that's just one part of a much broader conversation that Brooke is talking about, which is like an aging conversation, a care planning conversation that includes your end of life wishes, but it really has to happen much earlier than that, about what are our financial resources, how could we pay, how do you feel about living in assisted living or a skilled nursing facility, how do you feel about shared intergenerational living accommodations, where is the space for that, is there space for that, how do you feel about having someone come in and provide assistance. And the earlier you can have these conversations, the much better, because, as we become, cognitively challenged, physically challenged with disabilities, those are much more difficult conversations to have. So it's sort of an early conversation, and, every situation is unique and different, but the financial realities of it are really, really hard. And it does require some real honest conversations from everyone about what are the resources to address this.
Right. And if I could add on to what Andrew said, that early conversation. So my father passed in 2009, and around 2011, we actually sat down and had that real life conversation with my mom. What are your thoughts? And she said, when she was cognitive, that she didn't mind going into an assisted facility when it's time. We have her do the medical, and Andrew probably knows the term on resuscitate, do not resuscitate. Also, if that is their desire to go into a facility, please understand your state rules around assets. That's why I say you need a good attorney, because I could write a book on the runway you need in terms of assets to be in their name, not be in their name, how it's captured, how it's not, how you try to get them qualified for Medicaid versus Medicare. I could write a book, but you definitely, the earlier that you have it, then having conversation about what are the state laws, it is crucial. It's our, at some point we may have to pull that trigger to place her in a facility. But right now for her, we just want to keep her at home as long as we can. And thankfully, my dad was a good planner. And so we're able to do that, but it is expensive. It is expensive. And I would even caution, even myself, I've had conversations with my financial planner to say, should I get long-term care insurance? Because I have one child. What do I want him to have to be responsible for? So it's not only about your parents, but it's about you, and having those tough. And my son, because he's seen it, we talk about it. Like, I don't want to be a burden. I'm trying to set my life up so that you don't have to. My mom's mom had Alzheimer's. So I watched her go through the process. And that's another reason we could have that early conversation with her, because she had lived it. And so she gave us her desires, and we're just trying to plan out. But a good financial planner could help you on that, because even mine said, oh, your mom has Alzheimer's? We need to understand what you plan to do. And I was just like, you're right. So just some nuggets.
Great. So you talked about finances and all the different things, whether it's a living facility or nurses coming into the home. So on average, any one of you can answer. Is there like an average monthly cost, or what can people expect in terms of doing these things each month?
It is expensive. It is north of 10 grand a month.
Yeah.
For 24, I have 24-hour care for my mom, because she has tried to leave to go home. And when she says, I want to go home, home is like 15 miles away. So I'm not sure. Anyway, in Florida, I would say north of 10 grand, easy. I mean, if you want good care. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, Sonta.
Yeah, no, and I would just add to that there's a challenge with, those resources have to come from families privately. The only real payment for skilled nursing facilities or for in-home care, home-based and community services is if you're Medicaid eligible, and that is after you've drawn down most of your savings. So there really are huge out-of-pocket implications, which is really why there's so much family caregiver burden. We don't have a system in place through Medicare, only Medicaid, for providing those services. So we really we rely on the backs of families to provide most of our elder care. And so we need a fundamental shift in how we would build up that infrastructure if we were to change that. For now, what it means is families have to think about, is there a home that can be sold to sort of create assets around that if they want to move to a skilled nursing facility, or a reverse mortgage, or can we sort of crowdsource from family members enough combined with Social Security and a retirement plan to cover those costs. And for a lot of families, it's a fixed amount of time that they can spend down that money. And they hope the sort of math works out.
Thank you, Andrew. We have a question from our virtual audience. I know you guys have touched on this a bit. Sylvonia mentioned going to therapy is something that helps her get through part of the process. But the question is, if any, how do you deal with the guilt of maybe thinking that you're not doing enough as a caregiver for the parents?
It's hard. I cry.
Yeah.
And I get back up and pull it together because I have to keep going. And so just keeping my siblings encouraged, and they keep me encouraged. But yeah, it's a real thing. And so I try to go home quarterly to see, check on things and meet with the care team. But it is hard. It is extremely hard. That's why I'm in therapy.
Yeah.
Thank you for that information.
I'll just add, one of the challenges with the guilt is, like in Sylvonia's case, sometimes just by place, there are siblings who are just in the position to provide more direct care, and other siblings who have to figure out other ways, like Sylvia does, in terms of care coordination. It was certainly the experience with my dad and his sister when my grandmother was in a skilled nursing facility with dementia in New York, and my dad was here in Austin. And it's incredibly guilt-wracking, and there's very little you can do about it other than figure out what is your way to provide your contribution. And the other thing I'll say about guilt is that, we also, in that care for our parents, oftentimes have to come to terms with very complicated relationships with our parents. And there has to be sometimes some real reckoning about, as we become care providers for them, what kind of care provider were they for us? And very complicated scenarios around that, which also really helps to talk to people about, and mixed emotions about what does it mean for someone that I'm providing care for now.
Okay. So as we talk about all these things, as we said earlier, people still have full-time jobs. You're having to navigate, with your managers, your directors. So, let's talk about the workplace, and are there any adaptations? Are they making sure this is possible for people like Brooke and Sylvonia? What about medical appointments, illnesses, things that you guys have to deal with in the sandwich generation? You have to go to the doctor. You maybe have to go to your child's program or school event. So, what's happening in the workforce for people involved with this care, and how are adaptations being made?
Yeah, I can jump in. Part of Early Matters Greater Austin, which is an initiative here of business leaders coming together to support early childhood education in Austin, and it's led by the United Way for Greater Austin. One of our local initiatives is Best Place for Working Parents. It's a national campaign, but it's really to promote those family-friendly workplace policies that can really help retain and recruit a workforce and support the workforce that is the caregiving workforce, primarily focusing on parents of young children, but it also applies to the workforce with aging parents as well. And so promoting those policies such as flexible scheduling, paid time off to care for a sick one, paid family leave. I mean, those are some of those policies that we really want to promote and educate the employers on the importance of implementing within their place of work.
Yeah, I'll just add to that real quick. I mean, thank you for bringing up paid family leave, Brooke. It's a huge issue, particularly in Texas. In Texas, 74% of Texans don't have access to paid family leave. So it's a huge challenge. There's a bill in the current legislative session proposing that. I doubt it will pass through. So it's a huge issue. You know, at the federal level, we have the Family and Medical Leave Act, which provides 12 weeks of unpaid family leave for a newborn, a foster child, for your own sickness, for caring for a parent or a family member. But that's unpaid leave, and that sort of talks to the sort of challenges that we face, and it's only for, you know, a period of 12 weeks. So there really have to be like stronger systems and strategies in place to provide broader coverage for that challenge. Where I think Brooke has done really important work is like engaging with those employers at the local level. And Sylvonia has probably worked with this within her own work around, you know, for Austin and Central Texas, how can we have more employers understand the benefits that they receive by creating a work environment that maximizes the impact of their employees.
Yeah, and the city of Austin definitely has the FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act, in place. And so for me, yearly you file those documents, and that's why I'm able to go home and take time. They also have the employee assistance programs, which can provide, again, counseling. You can get financial planning through that. But I recently posed a question to our HR department, like, we need more direct resources, and especially here in Texas, is there a list of adult daycares? The aging program of Texas, I didn't know about that, so I'm going to definitely tell my friends who have that, that have parents here in Texas. But just other resources that we're not having to dig and just happen upon. For me, every time I talk to someone, if it's something new, I write it down. If there's an attorney, which I'm looking for a Medicaid attorney in Florida, thankfully a friend was like, oh, I was able to qualify. So all these nuggets that I'm finding, it's because I will tell you about my situation and what did you do? And so I've been learning, but if employers could definitely have a resource or point us in a direction where we can get it, that would be helpful. But again, family medical leave, there are several people within my department who are in the process or have been in the process. So we are very understanding. My direct supervisor is very understanding because she's been in this position too. So I'm blessed. I'm lucky to work for an employer who gets it.
Thank you. So this next question I'll pose for Brooke. We know we have baby boomers and Gen Xers leading companies right now, you know, startups and as managing directors. So do we have any intel at all as to, you know, what they're doing, how they dealing with this sandwich generation?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So I have some data here in Austin through the Best Place for Working Parents initiative. It's a designation and an assessment that employees can take, kind of ranked on 10 family-friendly policies. And through that data, we know that a lot of those companies that are prioritizing family-friendly policies, they're doing things like paid time off and paid family leave, flexible scheduling. One area that we see the trend where companies are really struggling to provide resources and supports is around childcare, especially for working parents with kids under kind of younger than kindergarten age. So that 0 to 5, those supports. It's a trend nationally, but we see it here in Austin that there's really a lack of support with accessing childcare, support funding childcare, paying for accessing childcare. And as Sylvonia pointed out, you know, it's kind of that roadmap for how to navigate your elder parent. We find a lot of new parents are looking for resources and kind of that roadmap of how to access and find affordable, quality childcare. And so part of our work is to create some tools and resources for those parents, but it is a struggle, and one that after the pandemic has really been, there's a spotlight shining on those childcare, the needs of those childcare needs for those families.
Yeah, and I definitely can attest to that. During COVID, through my work at Economic Development Department, we were able to provide funding to child cares, and especially centers in child care deserts, to try to become part of the state's Rising Star program. So if you weren't a Rising Star center at the time, acceptance of our funding, you agreed to go into the program. And so as part of my day-to-day work, childcare is definitely part of our workforce process, because you can't lift those to the next level in workforce if they're worried about childcare. And so that is definitely an area we are focused on within the City of Austin's Economic Development Department, because it is part of the ecosystem. If you want to retain workers and those who are worried, definitely that have children younger than 5.
Yeah. Yeah. Sylvonia pointed out the City of Austin and Travis County did a great job of allocating ARPA federal relief dollars to support the childcare sector in Travis County. And unlike other counties kind of in Texas, the City of Austin, Travis County really stepped up to support that workforce during COVID and continuing on.
Oh, great. So a question that we did have was that it's documented that people of color can experience more childcare challenges than those of their white counterparts. So I wanted to ask, is that also the trend when it comes to the sandwich generation, or do we have any data about that?
There is some data. The National Alliance for Caregiving does a study every 5 years with ARP, and certainly in terms of caregiving for older adults, communities of color, people of color do have higher family caregiving burden than white families, and part of that has linked to historical oppression and the generational wealth gap that's happened through systemic racism that's made lack of resources more challenging. And when you have less access to intergenerational wealth, you rely on the family structure to provide more of that support and that care. So in some ways it's connected to socioeconomics, in some cases it's cultural, but in all cases, yeah, it's something that is definitely recognized.
All right, thank you, Andrew. Moving right along now, the World Health Organization and United Nations have shared that by 2050, over 2 billion people will be living over the age of 60. Now, imagine the impact socially, financially, and with labor, et cetera. So, do we know anything like what is going on in Central Texas to address this issue? I'll start with you, Sylvonia.
That's a good question. I think it's definitely something we're going to have to address at the federal level, because Medicare and Medicaid, those policies are going to have to be changed, because as Andrew mentioned, we're not all on the same socioeconomic level. And just like we want high quality child care, we want high quality elder care, and it's just not happening starting at the federal level. And so that is one of my biggest concern is definitely we're living longer, and how do we maintain the health of our elders?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Brooke?
I'd love to just share a little bit of the demographics here in Central Texas around that. Right now in our 5-county area of Bastrop, Caldwell, Hayes, Travis, and Williamson County, there are about 300,000 older adults aged 65 and over. By the year 2050, in 30 years, that'll be 900,000. That will triple in just 30 years. And that's the dynamics of sort of the aging population, the baby boomers aging in, people living longer, all those things that Sylvonia mentioned. And the challenge with that is we are fundamentally unprepared to address the needs and demands of that. If you just think about the need for personal care attendants, that is a service that is offered for Medicaid eligible folks, but the Medicaid reimbursement rate for that at its lowest level is $8.11 an hour. So as you can imagine, there's a huge unmet need already for personal care attendants, for people receiving support from Medicaid and home-based and community services. So we've got to fundamentally change our investment in Medicaid and those services if we actually want to meet the demand. There are people who want to do that work. It's really important work, but we simply don't value it enough within our system to pay for it. Another example of that is adult day health centers. Sylvia mentioned, she heard about Age of Central Texas. They are the only nonprofit right now in Central Texas providing adult day health centers. That's a state certified up to 40 hours of care for a person experiencing some cognitive challenge. A great service, a registered nurse on site, transportation to and from. The Medicaid reimbursement rate for that is $35 a day. That is not adequate for what it takes a group like AGE to carry out adult day health services. So we only have 2 in Central Texas. We're trying to build more, but we have to fundamentally change our system around supporting that if we want to have the resources in our community to care for our beloved elders.
Yeah. And to add to that, Andrew, I mean, we often talk about the workforce behind the workforce, and how do we value and compensate those who are caring for our children and those who are caring for our elders. And there's on both kind of ends of the spectrum, there's the demand for that care far outweighs the supply, and mainly that's due to a workforce issue. We saw a lot of people leave the childcare sector after COVID with burnout and low salaries, and we are seeing the same thing with elder care. And if we can't compensate that workforce for the high quality work that they're doing and professionalize it in the way that they deserve, then there won't be that support for our children and for our elders that we so need. And I kind of add back, Sonta, to your original question, kind of these opportunities to elevate stories and elevate kind of the need and increase awareness about what individuals and families are grappling with. A lot of kind of what our work around public policy with Early Matters Greater Austin and the United Way, and the city's been really great in supporting this, is understanding kind of the needs of the workforce. One example is non-traditional hour care for employees here in Central Texas. We know that there's 18,000 children under the age of 6 that potentially need care outside of that traditional 9 to 5 workday. And there's just not that childcare in place to support those parents' needs. So elevating those stories and using that data, the city of Austin directed funding to study the supply and demand of non-traditional hour care and to begin to implement some policies around supporting that care workforce.
Thank you. So we only have a few more minutes, but we have so many good questions. I wanted to add this one from one of our community members who says that they're not in that situation right now where they have to be a part of the sandwich generation, but they are preparing for the future. So they wanted some quick tips, and any one of you can answer. What is just some quick tips that they need to be doing right now if they can tell that this may be where their life is headed?
Having an honest conversation with your parents now. Honest conversation, their thoughts, where they want to spend their elder years, and then finding you a good planner to try to chart a path forward, because it is not easy, it is expensive, and so starting to have that honest conversation so that you can put things in place to achieve the goals.
Okay, thank you. So we've talked about the caregiver, we're talking about the parents themselves and the child care. So I wanted to just kind of move forward in terms of the children who are sharing their parents with the grandparents and how they're affected by this lifestyle. And I'll pose this one for Brooke first.
I think there's a lot of beauty and positivity of that intergenerational relationships and learning and the history and the culture that gets passed along that way. And I think the more we can cultivate those opportunities and those experiences, I think the better, and create space for that as a family.
Okay. Zenobia?
I'll be honest right now, it's difficult for my son. This was a vibrant woman who took care of him with keep him during the summer, having conversations, to now she's, when we're home, repeating the same thing 10 times. The last time we went home, he really didn't want to go because I think he didn't like seeing her like that, because that's not the person he knew. So even having honest conversations with your children, especially around the teenage years, he loves his grandmother, but it's just not, and even for me, this is not the person that raised me. We're in a different stage of life, and being able to have that honest conversation. So right now, I don't put a lot of pressure on him. You know, he calls and he talks to her. But as far as going home, when I say she can ask the same question 10 times, or she's trying to leave the house and you're like, no, come back in. It is difficult for my son. So I don't pressure him. You know, I say, I'm getting ready to go. What would you like to do? But this last time he did have to go because we were doing 2 things in one trip. So he loves his grandmother, but it is hard for him. This is not the person that he once knew.
Thank you, Synovia. So last but certainly not least, we want to talk more specifically about the caregiver. And Andrew, I want to pose this to you first. Here's the question. When we talk about the caregivers, Synovia mentioned massages, she mentioned therapy, but, you know, what can people really do as they're thrust into this? Is there a caregiver training camp? What are some resources that are out there for people to access, to prepare, or if they're just getting involved with it, to learn more, because they may not even know?
Yeah, it's a great question. There are actually a lot of resources. There is an incredible nonprofit infrastructure that exists that provides support for caregivers, particularly around caregiving for older adults. I think Brooke knows more about the early childhood. I'll talk about the older adult piece. We mentioned Age of Central Texas. They coordinate a program called Caregiver University, where they provide both in-person, and it's about 20 organizations all together, and they provide in-person training, online training, because a lot of caregivers can't get to a space to actually engage in interpersonal work, but evidence-based programs that help people manage family caregiving duties, help provide self-care and those tips, and then specific needs around providing care for people living with dementia. And then also Alzheimer's Texas and the Alzheimer's Association also provide a lot of those training and resources. So there's a lot there. We mentioned employer assistance programs also oftentimes provide a lot of those resources. So there is training, and then a lot of those groups also provide support groups, formal support groups, both online and in person. And then the last little piece is the respite programs. Not only are there adult day health centers, but there are also short-term respite programs, usually run by churches. There's a lot in Central Texas that Alzheimer's Texas coordinates. And these are opportunities for just 4 hours, 1 day a week, where you can have a loved member, family member, go spend time there. You can go grocery shopping, you can have lunch, you can just sit in silence, you can have a moment to yourself so that you have the energy and the ability to go back and do the incredible work that all those caregivers do.
Okay, Brooke, I'll give you the last word. If you have any quick info you can add to that.
I would say for resources for accessing and affording childcare, I'd start with your local workforce boards. On their website, they do have resources there that parents can find to see where available childcare is. On our Early Matters Greater Austin, we link to a toolkit with a lot of resources for employers looking for ways to support their workforce's childcare needs, kind of menu of options to depending on where they are on that journey. And so those are 2 resources I would explore.
Thank you. Well, that concludes today's discussion on the sandwich generation. I want to say thank you to our panelists, Andrew Levak, Synovia Holt Rabb, and Brooke Freeland, for all the information on this important discussion. I hope you have been enlightened with this information and can use it to make yourself better and help your families as well. On behalf of Austin PBS and Leadership Austin, I'm Sonta. Thank you for watching.